Hi there. So I am offering a little mini teaching in preparation, if you will, for our Eros work weekends. We have two Eros work weekends that are coming to two different regions, one to Asheville, North Carolina, and one to Edmonton, Alberta in September. And in kind of leading up to these events, it's been quite a few years actually since we've had them here. It's been about 5 years since the last Eros Work Weekend has come to Edmonton, and we had one before then in Australia. And so I thought I would reignite the teachings around Eros work and start to inform, the community around us about this body of work. What can be received from, what can be learned from it, what can be gleaned in terms of our healing journey by doing this work. And I also want to offer up some of the teachings in little bite-sized increments so you can get some of the pieces of it, whether or not you come and do the work with us. All right, so what is Eros work? Eros work is a body of work that myself and a few other facilitators, we're all shadow work facilitators. We developed this body of work about 6 years ago now. And it's based on shadow work principles. So it uses the core model of shadow work, which is a 4-archetype model. And we've modified it or morphed the model into sexual representations. So archetypal energies that show up in our sexuality. And this particular body of work isn't gender-based. And so, these archetypes will show up across all genders. And so the body of work known as shadow work has specific processes in it as part of the model that help to reveal what's in shadow, first of all. So to actually be able to spot your shadows or what you've hidden or repressed in your own psyche, typically from early childhood wounding or traumatic experiences or painful experiences in our early childhood. And those shadows get repressed for many, many years, and then they show up in unconscious ways in our adulthood. And what that might look like is, sometimes there's uncontrollable emotion that moves through us, such as grief that we just can't stop, or rage that comes out over, an experience maybe that doesn't warrant or justify that level of rage, but all of a sudden this energy is just moving through our body. Or you get all kinds of thoughts move through your head that are really intense and you don't know what to do with it. And it's not something you'd actually share with somebody else because maybe there's some shame or some humiliation around having had those thoughts or those emotions move through you. All of that is an indication of what might be in shadow, what might be repressed on a subconscious level. And actually, when we really look at it, what it's repressed on a psyche level, but also it gets held in the body tissue. And so then there'll be an occurrence take place in our life, and this thing will happen, and then we won't really understand why we're reacting so intensely to it. It's like the intensity of reaction doesn't match the intensity of the situation originally. All of that is a good indication of what is repressed in the body, and through really good mentorship and leadership and safe containers to be able to ritualize and symbolically go into those spaces, we can first of all reveal and unveil what's in shadow. And we can also do some really, really specific work in order to heal those core wounds and to release possibly what's held in the body. And so, okay, so that's the body of shadow work in a nutshell. We have these experiences that usually last 2 or 3 days, these weekend experiences where you can come and in a group setting, you can bring whatever piece you're working in your life right now, whatever is being called on for healing, you bring it, and then there's individualized process work to help to move that and to heal that in some way, being witnessed and held by the group dynamic. So what is Eros work then? And so about 6 years ago, there was a group of us, including Cliff Berry, who is the founder of Shadow Work. He was one of the founders of Eros work as well. And we started really exploring sexuality and shadows, sexual shadows. Like what happens when something isn't working really well in our sexuality? What happens when there's difficulties there, or there's pain, or there's recurring patterns that are toxic even, or unhealthy, or we keep coming back to certain relationships that maybe don't serve us in a good way, or that are destructive somehow even. So we have these recurring experiences in the realm of sexuality. We don't have to be in a relationship in order to experience sexual shadows. We experience them on our own, in terms of our own relationship to our body, to our sexuality, to our, what kind of relationship we have in terms of self-care, self-love. All of that is in the realm of human sexuality. So it isn't only relationship based. I want to be clear about that. Eros work, actually, we really invite people to come as individuals, even if they're in relationship, even if their partner comes to the experience, it's still, what is it that you're going to work for yourself, on yourself, and not necessarily in relationship to somebody else. Because our shadows essentially are personal. There are experiences, are a compilation of our life experiences that have led us to these repressed emotions that are locked in the body, and these patterns that we recreate for ourselves. And so that's an important distinction in terms of sexuality work, because oftentimes sexuality work is relational work. Not in Eros work, it's not relational work. It's about your relationship to yourself. So in that context, it is relational work. And so Eros work is specifically designed to perceive our shadows through the lens of our sexuality, which means we talk about things on these weekends that are a little bit more taboo in our Western culture. We talk about our sexuality, we talk about our fantasies. We talk about what's working, what's not working. We talk about what's unhealed in terms of gender relationships. Maybe as a cisgendered woman, I may have had some painful experiences with other women, with men, etc., etc. And so we do some healing work in terms of gender relationships. And then at the core of it is really looking at where your own sexual shadows are, and how then do we heal that. And so the teaching I wanted to offer today both kind of talk about this whole concept of how we have sexual shadows, and what we discovered as we created this body of work is that the doorway of sexuality leads directly to our deepest, darkest core wounds. It's like, if you can imagine, so we have these experiences right in early childhood that are like really painful, and they cause a core wound, and a core wound that impacts our personality. It creates identities around it. It creates protection mechanisms around it, right? They're core wounding. And almost always those core wounds will express themselves somehow in sexuality, in our own sexuality. And so we don't, fully understand the science behind that, other than from our understanding, our sexuality is our vulnerability. Like intimacy happens there. We have to open up to someone potentially, and allow ourselves to be seen, potentially even just our naked bodies, like allowing our naked bodies to be seen somehow. So it's like our sexuality is the doorway to our vulnerability. So of course, in our vulnerability is where we hold our core wounds. And so what's powerful about that knowledge, and that knowledge wasn't discovered by us, there were some really potent pieces of work that have been, like the Erotic Mind by Jack Moore, for example, really informed that body of work. And so you have this doorway, right? And so we go in thinking and talking about sexuality, and then very quickly we go to what is at the core of our wounding. And that's where we do the healing work. So we don't actually do the healing work in the realm of sexuality, which is not really that ironic. I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense. We do our healing work in the realm of where the damage took place to begin with, where the painful experience happened at the beginning. So that's what we mean when we talk about Eros work and this whole consciousness and this body of work that was created around this consciousness. And the teaching that I wanted to offer today is a little piece of what we do on the weekend. And it's pretty potent, and actually it's quite juicy. In general, it tends to be one of those experiences you don't get to talk about this very often. And so to be in a container where we've created really good agreements and containment for vulnerability, to be able to then talk about taboo subjects is powerful and can be kind of exciting, right? And so one of the topics that we do a healing process around specifically is fantasies. Fantasies are fascinating. They're truly fascinating because fantasies tend to be this area where we can play out some of our really dark shadows that maybe aren't acceptable in our culture, that maybe are even illegal or immoral. Some of these ways that we fantasize that we might judge and condemn ourselves and we would never want to tell anybody about, or if we do, it's only in our most intimate relationships that we would talk about that because it's kind of risky, it's kind of out there, it's kind of, not the norm, et cetera, et cetera. You have a whole kind of subculture that's created around these kinds of shadows known as the BDSM culture, right? The kink culture. And so the capacity to create enough safety in environments to be able to go into these shadowy places, these darker places, and play them out, right? Play them out in a good, healthy way. And so in the realm of fantasy, we actually play out our sexual shadows in a good, healthy way. And oftentimes these fantasies stay in our head, right? We fantasize about them maybe as a way to like turn ourselves on or get in the moment and really get all juicy and feeling really erotic when we're in an intimate experience with another or with ourselves. So it might be an internal thing that goes on where I imagine this just so I can get in the mood. And also it might be something that I want to play out with a partner or with some, a group of people or whatnot. And so it's our darker desires that are in the realm of fantasy. And what we discovered when we started really exploring fantasies, and this is a piece that I wanted to offer here today, is that there's something really valuable that can be learned about the self in terms of healing when we use fantasies as an opening, as a gateway to healing. And so, for example, imagine something that really turns you on. So for me, what really turns me on is bondage. And the idea of being tied up and multiple people can, have their way with me, do whatever they want with me, and I have no control over it, and I'm completely helpless. That is a really big turn on for me. And so I've explored that from a healing perspective. And this is how we do that. This is how we explore that. We ask ourselves, okay, so what is it you desire from them? First of all, well, I like not being in control. All right, somebody else totally being in control, losing myself in that experience. There's no sense of self. I'm just this object then. Okay, so I like that. I like that not being in control. Then the next question would be, so what is the unmet need from that desire? And then that right away, when we go from desire to need, it deepens in its core. It's like there's this funnel, right? And fantasies are the entrance. They're the big part of the funnel. And then we start exploring a little bit deeper, and every question we ask that gets to the core wound at the heart of that fantasy. And every fantasy has a core wound at the heart of it. So what's amazing about working with fantasies is that we can use them as knowledge, as wisdom, if you will, almost like our higher self just dropping this little piece of information that can serve us and act as a map even for our own growth, for our own healing. I mean, if you choose to do this, right? Then the other option is that you don't. You just use the fantasies as a way to get turned on, and it's amazing and it's fun and yay, awesome. So if you wanted to do some healing work in the realm of sexuality, this is one gateway, one entry point into that. And so, okay, so then the next question is, what is the need, the unmet need at the heart of that fantasy? And so for me, in that particular fantasy that I shared with you, is the unmet need is to actually not have to be in control, to actually surrender control, surrender in the moment, to let go, to let God, to let the experience take place, to essentially not have to have the reins on so tightly, or being held on so tightly in my life. And that really speaks to that, a need for control that comes from having been raised in a family where I was the oldest, and there was responsibilities, and I had to be, had to do the oldest things. I had to take care, and I had to hold those responsibilities. I had to do things first. I had to be the responsible one that sets an example on how things are done. And so that, like, holding on to the reins and being in tight control and needing to be responsible and set an example, all of that has been held in my body. And in that fantasy, I can let go. I can let go of all those responsibilities. I can let go of having to be in control. Even as I bring the fantasy up in my mind, I can feel myself surrendering. And that is the depth of healing, that potential that can come from that particular fantasy for me. If you will, like, my higher self is teaching me how to surrender through that fantasy. And so try that on. What is a fantasy that you have? Maybe even your deepest, darkest fantasy, maybe the ones that you only stay in your head, that you don't even share with somebody else. Those are the ones that really speak to shadows, to what's repressed deeply in the subconscious level. What's the desire? What do you love about that? What is such a turn on about that fantasy? And then what's the unmet need beneath that? What need gets fulfilled when it gets played out in your mind? And then you can even take that one step further of, like, what part in you has that need? For me, I have like an inner teenager that has to learn a little bit about surrender, about letting go, about not being in control, right? So for me, it really satisfies that teenager self that has to be responsible. And I can feel it, like, when I go, when I allow myself to bring up the fantasy, get to the need, I can feel that part in me, that teenage part in me, learning to surrender through that imagery and the sensations in my body that imagery brings up. And so what part in you has that need that's being met in that fantasy? And then I would take that even one step further, is how then can you provide for that need within yourself? What can you give yourself to meet that need, to care for that one that is in need of this? That's the process, and you can see really quickly how it goes to, oh, a sexual fantasy, yay, that's so tantalizing. Oh, that turns me on. I can feel it in my body. I can feel the juices starting to flow. Amazing. And quickly gets to, oh, there's an unmet need there, and that need has a bit of a hole in my body. I can feel the void there that is yearning for some sort of love, some sort of support, some sort of, like, someone to tell me it's okay to let go of responsibility. You don't have to be responsible for it all. You don't have to fix it all. In fact, you don't have to fix anything at all. And I can feel that. I can feel that, like those words being spoken from my mouth soothes that part in me that is yearning to feel that need to learn how to surrender. So very quickly we go from this sexual experience to core wound, and we do that multiple times as we're progressing through the weekend, because each time there's a new doorway that gets opened and a new revelation and a new opportunity for healing. Now, not everybody is going to be looking for that kind of healing, for sure. And those that are, it'll really speak to you. You'll know it when you start to really analyze your sexuality or your relationship to your sexuality, and what's been showing up there and what maybe is asking for healing. All right, so good luck with that. Good luck exploring that. I do invite you to really explore it deeply, and if that fantasy, if you find that one dissipates because the core wound has been healed, then just observe, notice what's the next fantasy that shows up. There'll be something else that comes after it, almost guaranteed, because we're like an onion, right? We peel away that outer layer, then there's another layer on the, and then another layer on the inside, and then we get closer and closer and closer and closer to like our essence and the genius that lives inside of us. And so I do want to say that to do this kind of work helps to bring out that genius inside of us, because it goes right to those deepest places, and we remove those blocks, heal those limitations in us, and then there's space for that genius to emerge. And even, yes, it will impact your sexuality for sure on the other side, because those were the blockages, whatever was in the way. And it'll impact your relationships for sure. And at the core, it'll help to reveal and to emerge, as your most brilliant, beautiful self. That's one of the things I love about this work, because it is so core. And so I hope you've enjoyed this little tantalizing teaching. I hope it offers you some goodness in your life, and hope to see you soon.